Hello everyone, my name is Rochelle Innocent and I'm the founder and CEO of Project Purpose. Welcome to our channel. Our community is focused on fostering the intellectual and character development in children. We do this through our parent-child workshops that are focused on 4 themes: autonomy, self-efficacy, compassion, and self-concept, in order to cultivate grit, perseverance, and resilience in each child. And we are so thrilled to be offering one of the first of its kind digital, virtual, and continuous learning environments, enabling parents and children to connect from all around the world. At Project Purpose, our overarching mandate is to renew and rebuild family, community, and relationships. Our different social media platforms provide us with an opportunity to have discussions and to create space for all topics that relate to family, community, and relationships with ourselves as well as with others, with a primary focus on mental health and education. More precisely, the ways that the institutions of mental health and education play a role and have played a role in our societies at large. These discussions and debates provide us with an opportunity to think critically about what needs to change within these structures for us to live up to our bold slogan, support, protect, and empower each child through youth-focused development, better known as leadership in juvenescence. We recognize that in valuing our children's leadership potential, this also translates as recreating and co-creating environments, both socially and politically, that will enable our children to thrive. For those of you who are particularly keen on the topic, we also write thought pieces every other Sunday. We actually just dropped a thought piece this past Monday, so definitely be sure to meander over to the website and check out our online content. Now, if it is the case that you are looking for a listening alternative, well, we're available wherever podcasts are playing, and we've provided you with access to a few links down below. Now, as is the convention, be sure to subscribe, hit that post notification bell so that you are aware of every time we post. And of course, if you like these conversations and you want to keep them going, like, comment, and share this segment. Let's get into it. Allô les meufs et les mecs. Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And today our topic of discussion is mental health. And on the conversation around mental health this week, I want to talk about the way that we deal with uncomfortable truths. And I think that this is really important because a lot of my survivorship is based on my ability to accept uncomfortable truths. And one thing that I will say about having a background in HR, before moving into business transformation and change, which is still kind of an HR function, just more operationalized. So when I think about my background, so my career background, it started off in operational support, but training development, which is an HR function, and then that evolved into more project management, system migration, sorts of projects, and all of that kind of within this vein, within this lens of HR. So looking at cultures, communities, people, and how change impacts cultures, communities, and people. And one thing that you learn very quickly working in human resources is that there's an underbelly to humanity. And I think that this is an uncomfortable truth that a lot of people would rather live without recognizing. But I think that having already adapted to this truth, recognizing that we can have our ideals, we can have our philosophies around how the world should work and how the world should run, but the best way of achieving those philosophies and those ideals are being rooted in reality. And so that's why I like to call myself a realist. And I consider myself a realist because while I am driven, my visions are motivated by my ideals, by the philosophies that I carry, and by the vision of the world that I like to bring into fruition, the social impact that I would like to bring. I recognize that at the end of the day, there are some uncomfortable truths that we have to come to face with. And the only way that you can properly combat with these uncomfortable truths is being realistic about what your options are. And so I think that this general idea around acceptance of what is, rather than allow yourself to be drowned by what it should be, that is a huge factor that I feel plays into my survivorship story. And while yes, there's been a lot of different emotions floating around, what I needed to do and what I made a choice to do very consciously is to focus on being grounded, being centered, and having clarity. Clarity was so important because as someone who is generally speaking never spontaneous, I am like the antithesis of spontaneity. And anyone who knows me or who has known me at any point in time knows knows this to be true because I don't think that there's been a moment in my life where I have been spontaneous. I like to plan things to a T. In fact, when I had my Myers-Briggs done, while introversion, extroversion was straight down the middle, which means like I could go either way, while sensory and visionary is straight down the middle, I can go either way. When it came to the T and the F, which is kind of thinking or feeling, and when it came to the J and the P, which is judging or perceiving, I am hard T, hard J. I am not someone who makes decisions based on how I feel. And this also translates in the fact that I intellectualize my feelings. So even my feelings, like they have to go through rigorous questioning before I begin to make decisions around how I feel. And so when I think about how the last 4 years have really given me a lesson, like a really steep learning curve around being on the fly, that is something that I think was needed and that I would never have given myself were it not for the extremity of the violence and the situations that I have dealt with. But I think that it's still the journey that this stalking, because I still want to make sure that all of our conversations are centered around stalking, but it opened my eyes to really the systems of violence against women that take place. And so that's not something I can unsee. And while for me, a lot of the violence that I have incurred, none of it is physical, like a lot of it, they're things that are intangible, there are things that are psychological, there are things that are emotional, that are mental, that are financial, but I don't have these physical wounds. But the journey brought me through, especially with those programs for women escaping violence, women who had physical examples or physical presentations of the violence that they had endured. And while I was very respectful, I'm not someone who pokes and pries and asks about people's personal stories. I recognize that in speaking with a lot of the personnel, a lot of the administrators in these programs, that I just simply wasn't the woman that they were used to supporting. Like women who had the education that I had, who had the career that I had, who had the background that I had, but no issues in mental health, no issues in drug abuse, like none of those things. Like typically a woman with some of the traits that I had were not found in these programs for women escaping violence because they were hiding in plain sight. And so I knew they were hiding in plain sight because I knew that this violence stemmed from my university, the university that I went to in order to complete my MBA, University of Toronto. And I recognized to what extent how many women in the program that I knew personally were also hiding in plain sight. So I had made a commitment to myself then and there that if I did have an opportunity to come out of this alive, and I was going to, that was the plan, that I needed to do something to address this uncomfortable truth about violence against women in environments of excellence. And so I think when it comes to being confronted with a comfortable truth, as someone who's naturally very avoidant, I do my best to avoid it as much as possible. But sometimes when you're in a leadership position, when you are a leader, you have to be the one to accept the uncomfortable truth, the reality that it presents, and then put some of the stepping stones in place so that we can bring certain ideals and certain philosophies to life. Because I don't think that the answer is to move away from philosophies and from ideals that would create a lot more synergy, a lot more harmony, and a lot more safety for everyone. But I think it's about recognizing, well, what disparity exists and how can we bridge that disparity? How can we bring it to close? And I think that I'm not here pointing fingers, but I think that we do need to figure out what the root cause is. And in figuring out what the root cause is, without laying blame to any specific person, we can come together collectively and create a solution that is long lasting, that can contribute to the legacy that already existed. But that's not going to happen if we continue to bury our heads. And I think that as leaders, and as someone who has tried to be a leader in this vein by having conversations to support people around mental health, mental wellness, and education, looking to create transformative change and reform in these specific areas, I think that this is one aspect when we think about violence against women, or violence or coordinated violence that happens behind the scenes, uncomfortable truths that we would rather not address. I think if all of us became a little bit more tolerant to having these kinds of conversations, that we can put that intellectual horsepower together to create tangible solutions, not just for us, not just to impact my life specifically, but everyone in general. I think that everyone benefits from having systems in place that ensure everyone's safety and that ensure that everyone feels comfortable and feels respected and feels valued, right? And I think that all of us deserve having baseline dignity as part of the experience going in and coming out. And I think there's something very broken when we invite someone into a space, or we invite someone to have a seat, but as a result of taking that seat, there are aspects of their dignity that has been exploited and that has been infringed upon. So I think that really what has been and what will continue to be the required skill set in order to address some of the problems that take place at home, at school, at work, in life, is sitting and creating a certain level of space for those uncomfortable truths, because I know that we typically would like to avoid these truths or avoid the people who come bearing these truths, but then there's no tangible change until we're the one who's carrying that truth. And all of us are going to go through situations in life that bring to the forefront the grim reality of certain uncomfortable truths, and we can either avoid it, we can choose not to confront it, we can bury it if we have that option too, but sometimes we're put in situations where none of those options are available. And so as someone who standardly runs away from my issues, this was not an issue that I could run from, and this is not an issue that I can resolve on my own. But that's the uncomfortable truth that leads us now to think about, well, what are the solutions then, and what can we do to create long-lasting solutions? How can we implement policy governance? How can we rethink code of conduct so that this kind of violence is not something that we enable accidentally or on purpose, so that this kind of reality becomes less of an uncomfortable truth because it's less of a given, right? And I think that a lot of us know that it's a given, but when you're going around recommending there be whispered networks, like people who know, who support you, but keep that main system of violence intact, that is not going to work anymore. And I really do hope that for those of you who have been in the comments, who see some of the suggestions and some of the recommendations, and you yourself are enduring violence, that you don't take the recommendation to create a whispered network. It is only going to support and enable that violence to perpetuate against you and against other women as well. I think that we all need to start to really push the needle on breaking these systems of misogyny by being our own advocates and by finding the people who are comfortable enough to sit in these uncomfortable truths, who can be leaders in their own right and break apart these systems brick by brick. And I think that that's the only way that these systems are going to fall apart, is going to be a slow and arduous process. But it's not a process that we can get started if we can't first cultivate the discipline, the muscle to sit and to acknowledge these uncomfortable truths that will only be addressed with our time and with our attention. So I want to come in here and talk about that, because I think that I don't want to be seen as this person who's been in this fit of rage for the last few years. As the stalking has experienced, it's definitely not been the case. It's been horrific. It's been traumatizing, absolutely. But there's been growth in it as well. I don't want to diminish or to say anything that makes it seem that the situation is less violent and less dangerous. It's been very violent and very, very dangerous. But somehow along the way, I met my partner, and he was someone who was comfortable sitting in uncomfortable truths. And so he was able to sit in this uncomfortable truth, this uncomfortable reality with me, and really be like just such a support and such a rock in such a dark and horrific time. And so I think about that capacity as a leader to sit in uncomfortable truths and create solutions from that place. And I think that that's just a trait that we need to call every leader to rise to the occasion too. And so that's what I'm here to do, to speak about these uncomfortable truths, to encourage you and to really motivate, hopefully in this conversation, you, if you're now needing to be the one to gauge and to address and accept uncomfortable truths, to do that, to rise to the occasion, to be the kind of leader that takes the truth for what it is, and then from that point figures a way how to bridge the gap between the reality and the ideology and the philosophy that they would like to be the standard moving forward. So that's really what this conversation is about, some food for thought for you. I don't have any tangible updates about my situation as yet, but I do want to still have these conversations, shift the tone a little bit around the conversations as we talk a little bit about violence against women, about violence in general, about systems that create and perpetuate violence and that create and perpetuate the kinds of people that perpetuate violence, and how if each of us give ourselves the opportunity to develop the bandwidth to sit in uncomfortable truths, we can collectively build solutions that make those truths less and less a reality. So that's really the conversation for today. Some food for thought for you. So thank you so much for tuning in. That is it by way of updates up until now, and I look forward to chatting with all of you very soon. We'll talk to you later.